Hi, I'm Nick Schultz, the editor of American.com here at the American Enterprise Institute. My guest today is Kevin Kozar. He's the author of a fascinating new book called Whiskey, A Global History. Kevin is also the founder of a website, alcoholreviews.com, and he is a contributor from time to time to American.com. So, Kevin, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
So, first of all, tell me a little bit about your website, alcoholreviews.com. When did it start? What's your interest in the subject, and what does that site do?
Well, I started the site way back in 1998, and it grew out of my budding fascination with all the choices out there for consumers, all the beers, the wines, the spirits. I had grown up in Ohio, and I had grown up in a place where the selection of alcohols was rather limited. And then I got to New York City, where I was going to graduate school, and I just started running into these things, like Belgian lambics and spirits whose names I couldn't pronounce. And I thought, wow, what is all this stuff? And so I just started going out and buying things and tasting them. And some of them were terrific, and some of them were just terrible, terrible mistakes. And I thought, I should share this information. I should let people know what I think. I'm not going to portray myself as somebody who's got a fantastic palate who can pick up 20 different notes with a single sniff of the glass, kind of an everyman's palate, just to help people, spend their money a little more wisely. And as it happened, this was just the time when free web space started to become available, and it became very easy to put up a website, and that's how it began.
And you maintain it today, publish articles on it, and reviews. And
oh yeah. The site, I probably post between 5 and 10 new product reviews every month, and I cover the waterfront: beers, spirits, and wines. Okay,
and obviously whiskey here. So you've written a book about it. Tell us about the book.
Well, the book is kind of in line with the goal of the website. I really wanted to produce a book that was not for whiskey snobs. It was not for experts. It was for your average person who doesn't know the difference between, say, bourbon, rye, Scotch, Irish. They've heard these words, but they don't really know what they meant. They might have tried them once or twice in college, but they just didn't really have a good feel for it. And so the object of the book is to quickly tell them, here's what this stuff is, here's the difference, here's what it tastes like, here's a bit of history, here's how we got what we got, and here's some suggested cocktail recipes and some suggested brands that you can spend your money on, and you won't come away disappointed.
Okay, and this may sound like a stupid question, but what is whiskey? I mean, can you define it? I know you brought a couple of props here. Maybe you can tell how is it made, and how does it differ from other adult beverages out there?
Well, whiskey is a distilled spirit. It's a product that's fundamentally different from beer and wine. Beer and wine, you take grain, you take grapes, squeeze the juice out, you add yeast, it ferments, ta-da, you have beer and wine. Distilled spirits takes that beer and wine and then heats it up, captures the vapors, and lets the vapors recondense into the spirit of the substance. And that's what a spirit is generically. Whiskey now is made from cereal grains, the big ones: corn, rye, barley, and it is distinct insofar as a key attribute is that it's aged in barrels. And barrel aging is important because when a spirit comes off the still, let me just show this, it's clear as water. It's very potent, it's clear as water, and it's going to taste like the grain from which it was made. A bit like if you made a bowl of corn soup and a bowl of barley soup and you tasted them next to each other, they're going to taste very differently. Well, the pure white spirit coming off of barley or corn, they're going to taste different from each other.
But that's drinkable. I mean, that's
absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
This is actually produced by a small distillery called Tuttletown up in New York State.
Okay.
But if you put it in barrel, that's when some very interesting things can happen. This is a bottle of Four Roses small batch bourbon, and just you look at the color. Bourbon goes in barrels that have been charred on the inside, and the spirit goes in and out of the charred wood, and in the process of doing it, it absorbs colors, it absorbs flavors, and it fundamentally becomes transformed. And the longer you keep it in there, the different sort of flavors that you'll get with it.
We're at a think tank here. It's not a drink tank, although maybe it is sometimes. But I'm interested in this book, and you're writing about it in part because you write about the history of it, some of the politics and policy, as a matter of fact, as it's related to it. And you had an interesting essay that you wrote recently about the Tea Party and what it can learn from the Whiskey Rebellion, this episode in American history. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, the Whiskey Rebellion, what lessons Tea Partiers may want to take from that today.
Well, I guess the most basic lesson is that it's better to work within the system of elections and office seeking than to try to run against it. And you get some very hot rhetoric from the Tea Party side about, we're going to lock and load, we're going to, take over, we're going to overthrow. The language of revolution is often trotted out. And I don't, I understand the passion, but I don't think that's really something that you can turn into helpful actions. I mean, let's be real. The federal government has a lot more guns and a lot more weapons than anyone else out there, and you're not going to win that fight. So I went back and I took a look at the Whiskey Rebellion, which happened just a short time after the federal union was formed. The federal government decided we have a lot of debts, state and federal. We're going to have a tax on spirits. And an upcry went in Pennsylvania. This is an attack on freedom, our right to distill. We should be able to produce our own product. We shouldn't have to answer to the federal government. There was a huge class rift going on. It was East Coast merchants and the rich and Alexander Hamilton who were wearing the black hats, whereas the virtuous yeoman farmers of Pennsylvania and other places were the trod upon good patriots. And ultimately George Washington put it down and put it down gently. But it kind of set a pattern in the politics of alcohol in this country, which is that they're fundamentally contentious. Mm-hmm. There's an association. I don't know if it's because Americans did brew and distill their own for a long time before the federal government bothered to tax, or if it's simply because it's something we put in our mouth. People get very worked up about the government getting involved.
Mm-hmm. Another time where the government got involved, and we're coming up to the early next year will be the 90th anniversary of of Prohibition. Is that right? And actually, this week I think is the anniversary week of Prohibition's repeal. I think it was in early December, right? You have some interesting things to write about Prohibition, and as it relates not just to whiskey but to alcohol generally. We know a lot of the legacies from that period, and fans of shows like Boardwalk Empire, which is on right now, are seeing at least a stylized version of what was happening at that time. But you had an interesting essay about how Prohibition fundamentally changed American palates, drinking palates. Explain that. What does that mean?
Well, before Prohibition came, it was really an interesting time for the American beverage market. You had really, quite frankly, the development of a soundly functioning market. You had beers being produced by Germans who had emigrated en masse in the 19th century. You had wine being grown all over the country and produced. All sorts of different varietals were being churned out. And you also had a lot of whiskey being made. And these things were all done with an eye towards local taste, regional taste. I mean, those were the sort of markets. But with the railroad being built, with the creation of a national media, there was opportunity to grow. So we were right on the cusp of growing a national market in alcohol, and then Prohibition came down. And the result was you had winemakers ripping out their vines and thereby basically destroying their ability to make good wine for a long time. You had breweries being shuttered left and right, and you had distilleries shutting down. And very few companies survived the trauma of Prohibition, which went on for more than a decade. I mean, how do you stay in business when your main product has been rendered illegal? At the same time, demand didn't go away. Demand went down a little bit for alcohol in this country, but demand didn't go away. And so people had to get it somewhere else. And they got it from people whose goal was basically turn profits as quickly as possible. And so these were the folks brewing up bathtub gin, smuggling in whiskey that was cheaply made from Canada. Stuff was coming in from Scotland that was also not very good. And consumers didn't have much choice. I mean, not only did you have to defy the government and to break the law to go out and buy your alcohol, you couldn't go into a store and pick amongst 20 brands of bourbon. You kind of had to go with what was given to you in the brown paper bag. And a lot of stuff was not good, and a lot of it, because it had not been aged and because high-quality products had not been put into making it, it didn't have much taste, or if it tasted, or it did, it was really bad tasting. And that kind of set a template for the American taste. And so right now, we're still kind of peculiar amongst Western nations. When you look at our beverages versus the sort of stuff consumed in the UK or in Europe, our stuff tends to be much more lightly flavored.
And is that still the case, or are you seeing an evolution in terms of, I mean, I certainly think in terms of the beer market with microbrews and things like that. Are you seeing finally coming out of that and greater experimentation among American consumers for tastes and flavors and styles and that sort of thing? Is that, so you're seeing that market evolve here?
Absolutely. In the last 40 years, we've seen a movement across beer, wine, spirits, all of them towards craft products that have more robust flavors, more interesting flavors, and which also sell at a higher price point. If you look at alcohol consumption, the amount people are drinking per capita is not going up. It's been pretty flat. But the amount of money being spent is going up. So how do you reconcile that? Well, they're buying better stuff. And so whereas 25 years ago I could have walked into a grocery store in Ohio and there would have been 6 or 8 different types of beer which were all basically the same thin lager flavor profile. Now I go in and there's beers from Belgium, Germany, microbrews from all over America. It's really, the marketplace is really developing well.
Time for one final question. There are tons of great stories in this in the book. One of the figures that we come across in the book that I think is interesting, because I didn't know this much about his involvement with the whiskey trade, is George Washington. You talked a little bit about the Whiskey Rebellion. Maybe you could talk about Washington's involvement with that, and then also as a producer of whiskey himself. It's kind of an interesting bit of information about Washington that maybe a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah, Washington, I think, was perceived by some as being, kind of a stuffed shirt and not somebody who could enjoy whiskey, and he put down the Whiskey Rebellion because he was a stuffed shirt. Well, that's not true. Washington believed in the law. He believed in upholding the law and keeping the nation together, and that's why he put down the Whiskey Rebellion. He didn't believe that defying the law was an honorable thing to do. And when he got out of office, he realized that the market was starting to really develop for whiskey. And so back at Mount Vernon, he very quickly set up a distillery, and he relied upon a Scotsman to do it, who got him up in making a rye whiskey. And they ramped up production remarkably quickly, and he was making cash hand over fist for a few years. Unfortunately, he died a little bit after that, but he was distilling very well. And in the last couple of years, Mount Vernon has tried to resuscitate that tradition, offering up a Mount Vernon Washington whiskey, which was not made on site. It was a blend of stuff that was contributed, but ultimately I think that's what they're trying to do, is to set up a little boutique distillery there in honor of George.
He would be happy with that, I'm sure. Well, the book is fascinating. It's Whiskey, A Global History. Its author is Kevin Kozar, who's my guest today. Kevin, thanks for joining us today and telling us about the book.
Thank you.